Hello, I'm Mrs. H. Today's video we're going to be sewing the awesome oval bag. Now I absolutely love this bag. This bag has got an oval base, that gives it its name, but it also has some great hardware and a few extra features which I know you're going to love. So as I said, the bag's got an oval base. It's a nice sturdy base. You can add a set of bag feet to that if you want. The side connectors are, I've used Emmeline's Long John strap anchors. You can also use any other strap anchors that you fancy, though the measurements are all in the pattern. And then the strap connects using swivel clips. This means that you can use strap anchors like the Long Johns, which have got a slightly smaller hole, and you can have a nice wide 1-inch strap on your bag there. Now the bag itself is quite slouchy actually, so you can pack this, you can take it with you if you're going away, or you can you know, fold it into your suitcase. It closes at the top. Let me just close it and show you. It closes with a recessed zip, which is quite near to the surface there, so you're not losing any space inside with your zip, but you know that all of your belongings are going to be kept nice and safe inside there. It's got a nice long tail so that you can open up your bag quite nice and wide. And then inside there's a slip pocket and also a zip pocket. Now this pattern just uses a basic zip pocket, but if you've got my bag, the complete bag making masterclass, you can always change that out for a different kind of pocket, your choice. You can also add a few extra pockets if that's what you like. Now the lining seam is, there's only one seam on each, the lining and the exterior. So the lining seam is on the side here, and then the exterior seam is on the back here. So if you want to do some colour blocking, that would be quite fun. But the offset seams does make it slightly sturdier. So although there's only actually fleece in here, and it's quite a slouchy casual bag, you could make it sturdier by adding some Decaville Light or some foam or something else that gives you a slightly sturdier finish. Now I absolutely love this bag. I think it's great. I think it's really versatile. I think you could use it in a lot of situations. It's a great size, but also packs down quite nice, and it's got that great feature hardware. It's a classic shape, you know, it's a classic bucket shape. But with the addition of the recessed zip, I know that you're going to find space for this pattern in your collection. So gather your materials together, let's get sewing. Right, before we start, we're going to just transfer some marks over from the pattern pieces. So you'll need your pattern pieces for your base and your base stabilizer. So C and CS. Hang on, I've got these a bit muddled up here. Right. So base stabilizer. Now all I'm going to do is just snip a line in the middle of these triangles, and we're just going to transfer these markings onto the actual fabric. So we're just going to place that on top. Now hang on, I'll do it on the non-glue side, otherwise my mark's not going to show up. To make sure that's all nicely lined up, and then all we're going to do is just transfer those marks onto the base stabilizer. Okay, so all of those 4 marks are transferred over. So that can be placed to one side for the minute. And then we'll do the same on these 3 as well. So let me think, yeah, we are going to need these. Probably don't need it on the fleece if we do it on the right side of the base. Now remember to keep these in the seam allowances. All I'm doing is just snipping along the centre of those triangles, just so I can fold it back. Right, so make sure it's nicely positioned. Yeah, positioned. It also depends on how accurate your cutting out is, but don't worry too much. As long as they're in the 4 corners and they're all accurate to each other, then they should be okay. And this is just to help with positioning later on when we attach the bases. Okay, so that's the exterior. We should be all right without doing the fleece. And then the lining, do that on the right side as well. You can do it on the wrong side or the right side, it doesn't really matter. I find it easier to do it on the right side. So 2 centres and the ends. Just using a biro so that you'll be able to see these as well as me. There's nothing worse than not being able to see what's going on. Okay, so I've done all of my marks. Right, we'll pop those to one side and we'll get started on the exterior. So you're going to need the exterior panel, which is D, like so. Now mine's slightly too long for my filming area, so I'll move it around a little bit just so that you can see what's going on. We'll also need our contrast band B. Okay, so these should be the same length as each other ish, depending on how accurate your cutting out is, and we're going to place these right sides together and match up either the center or one end. I usually manage to cut out not very accurately, so I end up trimming a bit off. That's okay. And then all we're going to do is we're just going to sew these to each other. So we're going to sew along the bottom edge. Just add, oh, I wish this still had chocolates in it, but it doesn't. I'm going to add a few clips along the bottom just to keep everything in place. And then we'll sew these two together. So we're just constructing our exterior before we add our stabiliser. So don't panic if you're thinking, hang on, I haven't added any stabiliser yet. We're just constructing this and then we'll add our stabiliser to the finished panel. Right, so we are going to sew these using a just using a regular seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch and my regular stitch length. Now don't forget to back stitch at the start and the end. Okay, so that's 1 centimetre if you are using metric. Okay, great. Now, if you can press on your faux leather, on your contrast band, then do press. Open this seam up now and press. I like to press my seam allowances. Do I say press the seam allowances? No, just open. Yeah. Because then that splits any of the bulk there. It's your choice. You can press them open or you can press them towards the contrast band at the base. When we top stitch, we're only going to be sewing, we're only going to be top stitching on the contrast band. So if you want to press them one way, then I would recommend pressing them towards the contrast band. But it doesn't really matter. It's your preference, however you like. Now I'm going to give it a go pressing my seam allowances. Might try it on the back first, just because I'm not confident that my faux leather loves the heat. So just in case, it's probably best I do it on the back. Well, I've pressed them the wrong way. After all of that, I've pressed them the opposite way to the way that I said I was going to press them. Let's change them over. Now we're not going to top stitch just yet. So if you are someone who likes to skip ahead in the video, just make a note of the fact that you're not supposed to top stitch just yet, and then feel free to skip ahead to the next section. Right, this is kind of hard doing this big piece on this tiny little board, isn't it? Right, we'll give it a go though, because what's life without a few fun added extra challenges, eh? At least if I've steam pressed it, then when we do bend them over, or when we do fold them over to add the stabiliser, it should sit a little bit neater at least. There we go. Okay. Right, now what you want to do is get hold of your, let me see if I can finger press that a bit neater. No, I'm gonna have to try and manipulate that when I've put my stabilizer on as well. So if you've got the same issue as me, not sure if you can top stitch your faux leather, then what we'll do is get your stabilizer for your exterior panel, and we'll place this on top, smooth it out as best you can, and just sort of open it up, fold your seam allowances however you want them, and then fold it back down again. There we go, that seems to be nice. Now I'm gonna add some pins into this, but I'm gonna add the pins on the fabric side, and I'll add some clips into the bottom. So we'll start in this top corner. We're going to base this on like we do for foam. So the only reason I've used compressed fleece rather than fusible fleece, or compressed non-fusible fleece, is because I find that it gives a much nicer finish. It doesn't wrinkle so much. That's purely and simply the only reason. Okay, so just fold this little bit over here and pin that, smooth it out nice and smooth. Now I didn't buy these two fabrics together, but when I found them in my stash I thought, they go quite well together. So that's another reason why it's good to have a little bit of a stash sometimes. Everything else, not so much, but fabric stash, yeah. All right, get this folded over. I'm just taking my time about this because this is going to be the main exterior of our bag, and I want it to be nice and neat. So on this bag, the main seam for the exterior is in the center at the back. Okay, it's not at the sides. So the center of this panel is going to be the front of the bag. So that's another reason why I just take it a little bit longer, just to make sure that these are nice and neat. Right, so I've got my cotton part pinned into place. Now I can smooth my faux leather down into place and just hold that in place. We're going to baste all the way around this panel. As I said, we're going to top stitch on the contrast band at the base here. But if you'd like to, you can top stitch on both sides, it doesn't matter. This is your bag, and if you'd prefer to do top stitching on both sides, you can do top stitching on both sides, that's fine. Right, so what we're going to do now with this panel, we are going to baste around the outside using our 1/4 inch seam allowance, or 6mm seam allowance. And then we're going to top stitch on the contrast band 1/8 inch or 3mm away from that seam. So you can do it in whichever order you prefer. I prefer to baste first and know that that panel is not shifting, and then do my top stitching. So I'm going to change my stitch length up to a higher stitch length, or a longer stitch length, and I'm going to baste all the way around here at 1/4 inch or 6mm. Right, so once we've basted around all of the edges, we can just take all of those extra pins out of the way. I'm going to leave my pins in, I think, just above the base channel, just to make sure that that stays in place when we're doing our top stitching. My pins are camouflaged against my fabric, I think. Right, okay. And actually, I'm going to turn these pins around because I've got them facing the wrong way, really, if I'm stitching that way. Let me turn them around so that they're facing the direction that I'm going to be stitching from, and I'll be able to pull those out a little bit easier then. Make sure that my seam allowances are turned under still. Okay, right, so I'm going to change my stitch length back down to my top stitching length, and then I'm going to top stitch on the base panel, on the contrast band, not the base panel, on the contrast band side, using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. That's 3mm seam allowance. Take these pins out as I go. Make sure to put them in my pin pot before I catch myself. Okay. There we go. Right, that looks lovely. I'm really pleased with that top stitching. So that's our exterior panel done. I'm ready to start adding our hardware too. So what we're going to do, first of all, we're going to make some marks. So first thing we're going to do is fold it in half. Oh, hang on. Better trim this extra stabilizer off. Just trim the extra fleece off from these seam allowances if you want to. If you've got a particularly strong machine, you might not need to do this, although it will give you a nicer finish on these seams if you do then trim your stabilizer. So I'm just going to trim my stabilizer just by folding it back away from the seam allowance, and then we can get started sewing our bag. Right, that's better. Okay, I had to swap to my bigger scissors then. Okay, so I'll get my pen back. And what we're going to do, we're going to fold this in half and find the centre mark, and that will be the centre of the front of the bag. Okay, so I'm going to mark that at the top and the bottom in the seam allowances on the wrong side. You can also do it on the right side if you would like, but my it's not going to be very easy to spot on my fabric because I'm using navy fabric. So I'll do it at the top and the bottom in the seam allowances on the wrong side. I'll also do it at the bottom on the right side in the seam allowance because we'll be able to see that, and that will be helpful when I come to insert my base. Okay, now the next thing you want to do is mark your 3/8 of an inch seam allowance on the end here, and I've actually forgotten to bring a ruler up to the filming room with me, so I'm going to nip down and get a ruler, and we're just going to mark the 3/8 of an inch on each end, and that will help us mark the centers of the sides as well. Okay, so bear with me, I'll be back in a minute. Sorry about that. Okay, I've got my ruler now, so I'm going to mark my seam allowance 3/8. Hang on. Last time I had a panel hanging over the end, it fell off the end. So I'm going to try and learn from my error. Right, so I'm going to mark 3/8 of an inch seam allowances on, well, it doesn't really matter if you do it on the right side, the wrong side, or both sides. I'm going to do mine on the both sides just because I want to make sure that I do mine accurately while I'm filming. Right, so that's one side. Now I've got a bit of an overhang on this side, so let me just trim that up so that I'm all nice and even, and then I can mark my seam allowance on this side as well. So seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre. Okay. And then from this we can fold these into the centre, okay, and we're folding to match the 3/8 of an inch mark to that centre mark, okay, because after we've sewn our seam these two should match, and then we can fold it the other way, so matching that 3/8 of an inch mark. So you should have an overlap of 2 layers 3/8 of an inch, and where they meet is in the center of the you know, the front bit. Okay, and then flatten this out, and that will give you the center of the sides, so we know that that is definitely nice and even. Okay, so this is the thing, so because of the size of the panel to fit onto the base, it's not quite 100% accurately. It's sort of halfway between 3/8 of an inch and 5/8 of an inch, so it's halfway between 6 3/8 of an inch and 6.5 inches. So if you do this folding over, then you know that that is definitely accurate to be the centre in the front and each side as well. Now we are going to need to know where that is on the top as well, so line up your ruler with that mark along the bottom there, and that's not going to be seen, is it? Let me get a pin. Oh dear. Okay, so that's one side and this is the other side, and this is how we're going to know that we've placed our handles right on those side edges. As I said before, this the one seam on this panel is going to be right in the centre back rather than on the sides. Okay, so we've marked our panel, we've got the centre at the front and we've got the centres at the sides, and then when we sew this back seam we'll have the centre at the back as well, so that will help us to insert our base. Before that though, we need to insert our strap anchors. Let me just turn over. I'm just following the pattern here so that I can make sure that I don't miss anything and I don't give you any errors. Okay. Right. Okay, so we need our strap anchors and washers. Mine are a little bit messy because I keep unwrapping them to see if they'll go in my fabric and then wrapping them up again when I think, oh no, it doesn't quite go. Whereas this time the consensus was that yes, copper is definitely the colour to go for. So I'll need, in fact I've only got 3 in there. No, I have got 4. Good job I can count. Right, so you'll need 2 strap anchors, 2 washers and 4, let me wrap those up slightly, and 4 of these little screws. One, 2, 3, 4. They take 2 screws each. Okay, right, wrap those up again. Should really put them in some slightly nicer wrapping, shouldn't I? I think at the time I bought them, they are Emmeline's, but at the time I bought them, she hadn't put them into the packaging yet, and I didn't want to wait, so I just bought them as they came. Right, now I'm going to put my screws into my pin case. I wonder if I've got a magnet spare. There we go. So I'm going to pop my magnet there and pop these screws in, and that will keep them nice and safe. Okay. And I can pop my strap anchors to one side as well for the minute. All we need is the washers. So we're going to line these up over these marks we made on our centre sides. Let me see if it's a bit more accurate from the short end. So I'm measuring about 6 3/4 inches from the short end on that side. Let's have a look at this one. Yeah, sort of about approximately the same, but not fully. So as I said, I think measuring is, physically doing it is always going to be more accurate. Right, we're going to place these 1 3/4 inches or 4.5 centimeters from the top long edge. And we're going to centre them over the marks that we've made already. So let's line that up, 1 3/4 inches along the top. And that's my centre there. So we're going to centre these washers over those centre marks there, and that's centred at the top. Just see how we are on the bottom. Yeah, that's great. Now, how am I going to be able to mark this so that I can see it accurately afterwards? What I need is a bright pink pen, I think. I wonder if I've got a bright pink pen in my sewing box. Bear with me, let me just have a little look. No, I don't believe I do, because that would be too easy. What about a white chalk liner? Let's have a look and see if this helps. So I'm going to try really carefully not to move any of my rulers or anything. Yeah, that's working pretty well. Okay, so we're going to mark all 6 holes from the washer. Okay, that's given us a pretty good accurate marking there. What we're going to do is we're going to punch 6 holes through our fabric. Okay, so even though we've only got 2 screws, we need to punch 6 holes. I'm just going to place it on there, and I'll get my I'm going to get my hole punching tools. So these are usually my riveting tools. Get my hole punch tools, and we'll punch those 6 holes, and then I'll show you how to install the Long John strap anchors from Emmeline bags. Right, so to install these Emmeline Long John strap anchors, and these are the Emmeline originals, I've marked my positioning with my washer. Now there's 6 holes in the washer, but you only need 2 screws per strap anchor, and that's because on the back you'll see that at the top and at the bottom there are 2 prongs and 1 screw hole. Okay, so we're adding the screw into the screw hole, but the 2 prongs also need holes punching so that they can sit really nice and snug into your bag. Now these have got protective plastic on them that's just going down around the inside, so I'm just going to peel that back slightly. I'm going to leave the plastic on, but just want to make sure that when I come to take it off I am able to, because we're going to fit this so it's nice and snug against our exterior panel. Right, so I've marked my 6 holes, and then I'm going to punch each one of them using my regular hole punch that I usually use for rivets. You could do this with a hand one if you've got one and you prefer it. I'm trying to be as accurate as I can to each of those sets of 3 holes. Right, I've done 5. I'm not quite convinced I've got my positioning right on this 6th hole, so I'm just double checking before I punch it. It's always easier to check beforehand, isn't it? And you can actually punch through the washer slightly. Can't go in quite as far, but you can at least do a little punch, and then you know that you've got it nice and accurate. I wouldn't recommend hitting your hand. Right, so because my fabric is navy and a little bit hard to see, I'm just going to double check on the back that I've got those punched correctly. Yep, all the way through. Great. Now I'm going to add a little dab of fray check, because I don't want these coming out. Once they're in, they're in. And I don't want them to come out while I'm using my bag. Okay. Just dry that slightly. Now I'm going to double check, just place my strap anchor in to those holes, and you can sort of give it a little wiggle and feel it. So just double checked that that sits nice into all 6 of those holes, and you can sort of feel if you're sitting nice and snug in the top but you can't feel it latching into the bottom, then you just got to give it a little wiggle. Now I'm going to add a dab of glue on the right side of my fabric. I'm just using regular Fabri-Tac, and be very careful that you don't get this splodging out anywhere you don't want it to, or any random strings or anything. And then I'm going to pop my strap anchor back into those holes, make sure they're latched into the hole. So that is on that bottom bit, and it is on the top there as well. Okay, so I can just leave that to set for a few minutes, and then we'll turn the panel over and add the washer and the screws to the back. But just want to know that I've got a bit of glue in there as a bit of extra security, holding it nice and firm. Right, so I've turned my panel over, and I can see through those top and bottom holes on each top and the bottom section that my prongs are kind of poking through, and you can just encourage those a bit more if you want. Now I've got one of my screws attached to my magnetic screwdriver. I'm going to pop the washer on top, lining up those prongs and those holes, and then just add the screw into place. Now if you're not convinced that you've got it in the right place, don't force it, because you're in danger of stripping the screw or breaking the screw hole there. And you can ask me how I know that. Just nice and gently just screw that in, and then if you want to, you can just double check that that's secure on the right side. Yeah. And then what I like to do is I also like to add a bit of, I mean, you can add a dab of glue into those screw holes before you add the screws as well. But you can also, what I like to do is cover this whole washer and those screws with a bit of duct tape, just so that I know that those screws are not going to accidentally come out, it's not going to rub through on my lining, and that washer is not disappearing anywhere. Okay, so that, easy as it seems, that is how to install your Long John strap anchor from Emmeline Bags. I'm going to leave this protective plastic on there until I've finished my bag completely, and maybe even longer than that, just to protect it from any scratches, because that's a beautiful piece of hardware there on my bag. Now I'm going to install the second one into my bag in exactly the same way, and then I'll carry on with the construction. Right, so we've added our strap anchors, got them both on there, and I've added my duct tape onto the back just to hold them in nice and secure. So now we're going to sew this panel together. So we're going to sew the back seam. So what we're going to do is we're going to fold it in half, and all we're going to do is just sew along this short end here. However, what I want you to do, or what you probably want to do, because it will give you a neater finish, is when you're matching these sides up, match up the seam of where the base, the contrast band, I'm gonna have to change the pattern in this, right, because I keep calling it a base. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Match up the seam with the contrast base first. Okay, so that seam there is perfectly matched, and then from there match up to the bottom and up the majority, the rest of it, to the top. Okay, now when we sew this, we're going to use our regular stitch length, so just change that if yours is not set on your regular stitch length, and our regular seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre. And I'm probably going to start from the bottom because it's less of that to shift if it's going to shift, and I want to make sure that my seam there where the contrast band is attached to my exterior matches perfectly. Right, so I'm just going to double check mine. Oh, they match really well, they match great. You can just sort of unfold that and check that just to make sure that they line up. That's going to be, remember, that's going to be at the back, in the centre of the back. So once you've stitched that, I'm going to open these seam allowances. Now if you can press your seam allowances open, then that's great. If you can't, then just clip them open. As I said before, if you're able to press this bit open, it's going to give you a much neater finish to your bag. So I'm going to do that on the bit that I can, and when I press my iron to it, I'm going to try to only press it onto this bit where the seam is, because my you know, these are going to be my sides, and if I press it like this nice and flat, I'm going to have wonky shaping to my bag. But I just want to make sure that the seam allowances at the top and the bottom are nice and neat. A nice neat finish there. Well, that's a really nice crisp press, so that's good. Okay, so I'm just going to clip that, make sure that stays open. Okay, right, we can pop the exterior to one side for the minute. We are going to add the base, but we just need to add our stabilizer to the base first. So you can always just double check that your centers are lined up and those are perfectly on the sides, which they are. That's great, I'm happy with that. Right, so I don't need my lining base, that can go back to one side for now. I need my exterior base and my base stabilizer. That's the ultra firm interfacing. I'm using Decaville for mine. and also your compressed fleece. So first thing we're going to do is fuse this into place. Now I didn't mark on the wrong side, did I? I marked on the right side and I said I didn't think it mattered, but now remembering it does matter because I need to be able to line up this ultra firm interfacing on my Decaville. Oh dear, I think I've steamed my pen too much. You know, I've got a lot of fancy pens in this studio and I'm still using the cheapest ballpoint I could find because I keep losing them. I'm sure I'm not the only person. Right, okay, so I've marked my 4 points on the base there. So that's my exterior base, or my contrast base rather. And then I've got my Decaville and we're going to line this up. So first I like to line it up so that the centres are matching there on that long edge. And then you can just give it a little bit of a wriggle and make sure that these two are also matching up. And that just means that your Decaville is centred in the middle of that base perfectly. Now hang on, I was just about to fuse that on then, and then I thought I'm not convinced that my faux leather can take that. What I'm going to do, you know, I'm going to swap this over actually. I'm going to do it the other way round and fuse it to my fleece instead, just to make sure. Okay, so I'll still line it up the same as I did, make sure it's perfectly centered, but this time my fusible side is facing up. And then I'm going to place my fleece on top, make sure that's perfectly positioned. That's not quite. Okay, and then I can fuse that, give that a little bit of heat to attach that. Okay, so I've only pressed that very, very lightly just to make sure that that has stuck into place, and then I can remove my base and fuse that into place a bit better. That was a much better idea. I should have done that in the first place. We'll pretend that I've done that in the first place, okay? We'll ignore that I didn't. Okay. Right. Oh, that's better. Much better. I'm much happier with that. Okay, so now we can place the proper base over the top. Let's say proper base, the contrast or the exterior base. And I'll clip around that to hold that all together. And then we can baste around the exterior to keep all these layers together. I'm just adding a few clips to stop this shifting. Okay, so I'm going to increase my stitch length up to my basting stitch to make sure I've got that nicely centered. Yeah, I have puckered that slightly where I've clipped it, so I'll just move my clips. There we go. Make sure that's nice and flat on the front and the back. And then we're going to stitch using our 1/4 inch seam allowance, or 6mm, which is what we're doing our basting on. I'm going to go all the way around the outside. Okay, there we go. Oh, that looks so lovely and neat. Lovely. Okay, I wish my top stitching was as neat as that. Right, what we are going to do now, we're going to retrieve our exterior. So if you did your base with the fleece slightly larger, then you want to trim that down now. In fact, let's trim that down. Why not? There's no harm in having all the bases covered. Pun not intended. All the bases covered when it comes to nice and neat seams. So let's take the bulk out of here, and then we reduce the risk of bulky seams. I'll just trim around as close as I can to that basting line. There we go. Right. Now we are going to match our base to our exterior. And we're going to do it this way. So we want our shorter ends of the oval to be matching the marks where our strap anchors are. And this back seam here to match one of the marks on the long edge. Okay, so we're going to be matching our contrast band onto the base, otherwise you'll end up with your bag upside down. Oh, that's something I didn't check. Phew, my goodness, I just thought I forgot to check that my peacocks were the right way round. I might have had upside down peacocks otherwise. Right, and all we're going to do is just clip that back centre seam to one of those marks on the long edge, like that. Okay. And then I'm going to flip it over and match the, oh dear, I've got all my hole punchings here catching onto my fleece. So I'm going to match the other mark on the long edge of the base to that mark that we made that shows that it's the front of the bag. Okay. Now I guess you could do this sort of 90 degrees and you would just have a different shaped bag. That would be quite fun actually. Sorry to digress. So now this mark where we've used to place the strap anchor, we're going to match that to the other quarter mark and then the other side as well. So all four of these marks on the base are going to match up to these four places on the exterior. So you've got the back seam and then the other three marks that we made as well. So once you're happy that those four markings are all matched up, we can just go round the base and just clip this into place. Now you might need to make small snips into your exterior panel to make them match up, but I don't find that I do usually on this base. I find that it fits pretty well without having to make extra snips. But if you do have to make extra snips, don't worry. So all I'm doing is just adding a few extra clips in. Now, if you're not confident about being able to sew around this base, then I would recommend that instead of clipping, you maybe consider stapling the seam allowances together within the seam allowance. Okay, just to make sure that that doesn't shift while you're sewing it. And then you can trim the seam allowance down afterwards. Right, I might have a little pucker in there, so let me just smooth that out. There we go, that's great. And I'll just go all the way around here. Making sure there's no puckers or catches or anything. Okay, and now we can sew all the way around our base. So if you are not confident doing this, you might want hand based or you might want to staple based. If you're confident, then you can just whack it under the machine and get going. It doesn't matter where you start, you can start at the front or at the back. I would recommend starting on one of these straighter long edges because it's a little bit easier to get under the presser foot then. And we're going to sew using our regular stitch length and our regular 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre seam allowance. So I'm going to start around about here. Now I've got my walking foot on, which is quite long. So I am going to take a couple of clips off. In fact, actually that is shifting a little bit. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a pin just to make sure I'm adding that pin in the seam allowance, just to make sure that those layers don't shift around while I'm getting it under my foot. Okay, so I've got that lined up. I'm going to put my needle down and then I can lift my presser foot and take that pin out. And I'm going to put that pin back in my pin pot before I lose it. And I step on it or something. Okay, so I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. And I'm just going to take my time and just sew around. I'm going to start with my needle down so that anytime I need to pivot or readjust my hands, the bag is not going anywhere. Right, okay, so I haven't got any puckers on that base. I'm just gonna feel in around the inside and check I haven't got any puckers on the contrast band inside before I start trimming. Just want to make sure that if I've got any puckers that I have the opportunity to take those out before I start trimming. I might need to just double check on this little bit. Oh dear, I think I've lost a pin after all of that. Okay, no, that's fine, there's no pucker there. Let me take this other pin out before I lose that one as well. So I'm just turning this through. It's not going to sit quite right because we haven't trimmed the seam allowances yet, but I just want to double check if I've got any puckers, and if I have, just give myself the chance to go back and unpick those and re-sew them. No, I think we're okay. Right. Okay, great. Okay, right. I think I've said the word okay about 7 times now in that one little sentence. So now we want some pinking shears. If you've forgotten your pinking shears downstairs in the studio, like me, or haven't got any, then just use a pair of scissors just to snip into these seam allowances and take away the bulk of all of this fabric. And this is going to help it sit nice and neat when you turn it out. Now this is going to take me a while because I'm not used to doing this. So I think what I'll do is I'll pause myself, go and get my pinking shears and come back and show you how to do this a lot quicker. If you haven't got pinking shears, then maybe it's time to go and get a cup of tea and put something good on to watch while you're just clipping these notches out of the seam allowance, just taking this bulk out. Just do this little bit to show you, but it is worth doing. Don't skip this step because it will mean that when you turn your bag right sides out, the base will sit nice and flat. Okay, so that's what I've notched, and I'm going to go and get my pinking shears for the lazy way as well. Right, I've retrieved my pinking shears. Let's do this the lazy way, shall we? The smart way. So all I'm going to do is just trim these seam allowances around the base with my pinking shears, and this will take the bulk out, and it will also help it to sit a little bit neater around the curve. I'm going to go all the way round, making sure not to cut through my stitches. Doesn't matter if you cut through your basting stitches, but don't cut through your stitches that are holding the base on. Otherwise, for obvious reasons, the base will fall off. Okay. Right. Now that should sit a lot neater. Let's see, are we supposed to turn it inside out or turn it... Right, it doesn't say, so I think, now I'm saying this like it's not my own pattern. It is my own pattern, I fully understand that. Right, you can have a peek inside and see what your bag looks like at this moment. I think that looks great. I really like how that's looking at the moment. Okay, so we're going to put this to one side and we'll sew the strap next. Right, let's get started on our strap. So we've got our strap here. I've had to piece mine. Mine wasn't long enough, but that's okay. We'll all work the same no matter what. Right, so we're going to draw a line along the centre of our strap. So our strap should be 4 inches. I'm going to draw a line 2 inches from these long edges. And we're going to do this all the way along. As you can see, I've had to piece my interfacing as well, but that's okay. Once my strap is constructed, you won't even know any different, I don't think. Right. I'm just drawing the whole length of this strap. Okay. Now, if you're using fabric for the strap, then you can just go ahead and press each edge into the centre. But what we're going to do is, hang on, try and tuck it down here. Sorry, only got a little bit showing. Okay, we're going to fold each long edge into the centre, and we're going to stitch that using a 1/2 inch, 1.2 centimetre seam allowance. Okay, so directly down the centre of this strap. Now, I wonder if I've got a magnetic seam guide here. I might not have. If you've got a piece of washi tape or something, you can also use that to mark the 1/2 inch seam allowance. I've only got clear tape up here, but that might be enough to help me. Absolutely useless. That was not enough to help me. I wonder if I can draw on my tape, maybe. Oh, I can. That was quite useful. Right. Okay, so I'm going to use my top stitching stitch length for this. And I'm going to fold it over. I'm going to fold over and clip just for a little bit at the top here, just to help me get started. That clip's going to come out before I even put it under the foot, but it will help me make sure that these next few are nice and straight. Okay. So you can back stitch at the start and the end if you want to. I'm going to. All we're doing is literally just folding this into the centre and sewing using a 1/2 inch seam allowance the whole length of this strap. Okay, I have to be careful not to let go there in case it flew off the end. Now I'm going to do exactly the same, but on the other side. I'm just trimming this bit down here because it's just going over that centre line slightly. So I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side. I'm going to fold this into the centre and stitch 1/2 inch away, or 1.2 centimetres away from the edge. Okay. Oh, don't want to lose it over the edge there. Right, so what we've got now is our nicely folded in strap, and we are now going to fold it back on itself. So you've got the raw edges here. So we're going to fold these right sides together so these raw edges are out. Okay, like so. And then we're going to stitch across this short end. So we're going to stitch using 1/4 inch or 6mm seam allowance. I like to start with the folded ends so that I make sure that they're not going to shift around anywhere. Let's do the other end while we're at it. So we'll fold it right sides together. So the folded ends, or folded edges, sorry, are together, and the raw edges are out. Pop that under the presser foot. Sew that at 1/4 inch seam allowance, 6mm. Okay. And then what we're going to do, we're just going to trim the corners of these ends that we've sewn. And then we'll fold these right sides out. Now if I had my trusty crochet hook, this would be the perfect moment for it, but alas I don't. So it's back to my sewing machine screwdriver. Make sure these ends are nicely folded out. Okay, so you can see you've got all the raw edges here inside. That's folded over. I'm just going to clip that to hold that in place. I'm going to do the same with the other end. Fold that so all the raw edges are inside, and clip that into place. Now we're going to sew, so we need to fold all of this in. We're going to sew around all 4 edges of this strap using our 1/8 inch or 3mm top stitching seam allowance. I'm going to use my top stitching stitch length. I'm going to start around about here, and I'm going to sew down the open end first, folding this in as I go, okay, to make my 1 inch strap, or 2.5 centimeter strap width. So I'm going to start around about here. I'm going to pop that under my presser foot. Let me put another clip on here actually, just to make sure that this is all held together where it should be. Okay, so again I'm going to start with my needle down, because I want to know that if I need to just readjust my hands at any time, I can do that. Okay, so as I approach this short end, I'm going to stop near the short end with my needle down, lift my presser foot and pivot. So along the short end and then along the second long end. I think my strap might be longer than it should be. Looking at this, I think I might have mismeasured. so I'm back round to the start again. So that's all done. That's lovely. Okay, I wonder if I did mismeasure. Let's just double check. Shall we? No, I don't think I have. Just looks quite long, doesn't it? Right, so now we need our strap slider, and I've got a wide mouth strap slider for this one, just because my faux leather is a little bit bouncy and a little bit sticky. Right, so I thought rather than using a regular strap slider, let's just prevent any awkwardness or anything. Right, now I have got, so let me just think if I have that. Yeah, okay, so I'm going to put it on this end. Sorry, excuse me, just talking to myself there. So I'm going to thread it through. Okay, so I'm threading my strap through on the bottom side of the slider, and then through the top and back out again like that. And then we're going to flip it over so that the right side of the strap slider is facing up on the same side as the fold over. Now I'm going to stitch my strap into place. If you would prefer to rivet it, then please do add a rivet or two here instead. Your personal choice, whatever you prefer. Okay, there we go. Okay, now because we're using swivel hooks for this, we can just make our strap nice and easy. So we're going to add a swivel hook on, just one at the moment, and thread it all the way along. And I'm only threading it as far as here, just so that you can see easily in one shot what we've got going on. So I've got my end of my strap, my not quite straight end of my strap, the right side of my strap slider, and then I've got a swivel hook facing away from the strap slider. Now we're going to thread this loose end of the strap through the slider, so over the bit that we've already done, and back out the other side. Okay, so this is where we're at the moment. Let's have a look. So we've got our strap slider and our swivel hook here facing away. Okay, so that looks like a regular sort of part of a strap so far. And then all we need to do is thread this second swivel hook on the end and fold it over. So I'm going to turn over to the wrong side of my strap just so I can work out which way to fold it over, because I want that to be on the back of my strap. If you want it to be on the front, you can. You would just need to change which way you thread your swivel hook through. There we go. So I'm just going to stitch this into place. As I said, if you would prefer to rivet, then please do rivet. There are no rules with this one. You can do whichever you prefer, or whichever you're most comfortable with. Okay, let's trim my stray threads there. Okay, so that is our strap, our adjustable strap. You can use this technique in any other bag that you want to as well, that you want to have a changeable strap or a removable strap. So we can pop that to one side now until the end of our bag, once we've finished the final construction, and then we can just attach our strap and it's ready to go there. Okay, right, let's move on to the lining section then. So we're going to start with our pockets. So you'll need your lining main panel. I've got here in this nice eye-wateringly dotted fabric, just to make things a little bit more fun. And then you'll need one of your lining pockets, and this will be the one that you've cut 9 inches wide by 10 inches high. So if you've got directional fabric, it will be the one that let me show you. So on my slip pocket, I've got the directional fabric going 10 inches wide by 9 inches high. This is the other one that's 9 inches wide by 10 inches high. And we're going to pop this, no, hang on, we're not. We're going to make some marks first on here before we start anything, because otherwise we're not going to know where to position anything, are we? So let's start off as we did with our lining, marking our seam allowances, so 3/8 of an inch at the top and the bottom. That's 1 centimetre if you are metric. Now the lining has got offset seams, so the lining seams are, or the lining seam is in the side rather than in the back, and it's just to give it a little bit more strength as well, so it's not quite so floopy, and also to offset the bulk. Right, so we'll mark the centre of the whole panel, same as we did before, top and bottom. Might do this on the back so that you can see it a little bit easier here. Okay, then what we're going to do, the same as we did for the exterior, we're going to line up that. We'll do it on this side because you can't see on the dotted fabric anyway, can you? Because the marker's on the other side. Just mark my centres a bit better. Okay, so we're going to line up that 3/8 of an inch mark with the centre there. So this is actually overlapping the centre by 3/8 of an inch, and then we are going to overlap this side so that the marks are all matched up. Those 3/8 of an inch marks are meeting in the centre, and you've got 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre overhanging either side of the centre. Right, then we can flatten this out, and that will give us our marks for where we want to position our pockets. That will give us the top and bottom, sorry, the centre marks. Right, just make sure that's nice and flat so we can mark these. There we go. Right, so if you are able to, I would transfer those marks over onto the right side as well, just marking within the seam allowance, so you shouldn't be able to see this at the end of construction, just to help you now during construction. My mark hasn't come through very well. There we go, it's a bit better. Just mark that on the right side. There we go. Okay, so in this in the panel and with the lining, the seam will be at the side. Okay, so when we're positioning our pockets, we need to be positioning them on these quarter marks here. Okay, these quarter marks here. So we're going to start off with the lining panel, and I'm going to fold this in half so I can find my centre mark of this, just so I can make sure it's all nicely lined up. I mean, it won't really matter if it's out by a little bit, but I should at least try and make it straight, shouldn't I? Okay, so this is gonna go, let's see, mark the centre, front, back. Yep, got that. 3 inches from the bottom edge, that's 7.5 centimetres. Better get my ruler for this, hadn't I? Okay, 3 inches from the bottom, 7.5 centimetres, and we'll line that up. So we're centering that over the marks that we've made. That does make it approximately, I think about 2 1/4-ish, not quite, it's just between 2 1/4 and 2 1/8 from the side there. But if you've lined it up on those marks, then it should be perfectly in place. And as I said, it doesn't really matter if your pocket is 1/8 of an inch out of the way. Okay, so I'm just adding some pins into this just to hold this panel in place while we're working with it. And we're going to draw a box on this panel, and we're going to place the box 4 inches from the bottom of the pocket, that's 10 centimetres. I will need my ruler again. And we're going to make this box 8 inches long. What I'm going to do first is draw my bottom line to start with, and then my line that is 3/8 of an inch above it, because the box is going to be 3/8 of an inch high. I've got my 2 lines there, and then I can use my centre marks here that I've made before just to mark where the centre is, and then I can line up to make sure that I'm getting my length completely right. So it should be 8 inches long. That should be 4 inches either side of that centre mark there. Okay. It's a little bit hard to be accurate with this chalk liner, but I think it's probably the best I've got for you being able to see what I'm doing, so I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to draw a line along the centre, and this is going to be where we cut. So that outside box is where we sew, and these inside lines will be where we cut. Okay, so I've drawn a little triangle on each end and a line in the centre. Now when we come to sew this on, we're just going to start, I like to start in that top corner there. I'm going to sew all the way along, stop at the corner there with the needle down and lift the presser foot, pivot, sew to this corner, do the same again, and we're going to continue around all 4 sides. Now you might find it's really hard to get right into the corner there and be accurate. So as you're approaching it, as you're nearly there, if you think, actually, I think my stitch is going to be too big to get into this corner accurately, decrease your stitch length right the way down. You could go down to a number 1 stitch length, or half even, I suppose, 0.5, and decrease down just so you can make sure that your needle stops really accurately in that corner. And again, as you're approaching the 2nd, 3rd and 4th corners. Okay, so I'm not changing my thread. I'm going to stick with my orange thread that I've been using. For one, it will help you to be able to see exactly where I'm stitching, but also it will be a fun challenge for me to not sew too wonky, which is definitely a challenge for me. So I would just ask for your grace in this. Right, so I'm going to start in this top corner. Now you can either backstitch or you can overlap a few stitches. So I'm just going to not backstitch at the start, but I'm going to sew all the way around, and then I'm going to overlap a couple of stitches at the end. I'm going to start with my needle down. That will help when we get to the corners. So I'm decreasing my stitch length down to number 1. I'm able to get really accurate into the corners there. And then I can increase back up to my regular stitch length. Okay, so I've overlapped a few stitches there, and do a little back stitch, and that should mean that that stitching is nice and secure there. Okay, so we can take this out now. Now before I think about cutting, I'm going to steam press these stitches, and that is going to give me a really nice neat finish then when I turn it through. Just help set these stitches into this seam. Okay. Get my little board. I'm going to give him a little steam press. Okay. Now before I cut, I'm actually going to push this up and press away from those stitches. And then I'm going to pull this down away from those stitches and at the side. And at the other side. Okay. Now we can cut through this center line here. I'm just going to make a little snip in the middle and then snip as close as I can to those triangles. And then I'm going to get my little scissors just so I can be really accurate. And I'm going to snip into each end of those triangles, and I'm going to snip as close as I can to the stitches without actually cutting through them. Okay, so if you want to sit nice and neat at the end, you do need to go as close to them as you can. But don't snip through them because otherwise it'll all come unravelled. Okay, lovely. Right, now we're going to push this through. That was halfway between pop this through and push this through. It turned out as posh this through. I'm going to push this through and make sure it's all out the other side. Now don't press it from this side, okay? This is the key to hiding your puckers. Now whichever way you make a zip pocket, you are going to get some puckers probably somewhere. So if you press from this right side, you'll find that any puckers you have got are hidden inside your zip pocket. Okay, so I'm just pressing along the bottom edge first. And then just going to finger roll this top edge so that seam is really well pushed out, and press along the top edge. Okay, and then the two short ends as well. Now once you've pressed from this right side, then you can go and press from the wrong side, but you'll see there are puckers there, and that is what we want to avoid. Right, let's just remove this out of the way. Okay, that looks pretty neat. And we're going to turn over to the wrong side. We'll get our basting tape, double-sided basting tape. I'm just going to take that end off because that's a little bit dry where it's been sitting waiting for me. And just going to add a line of this along the top and the bottom. Now don't worry, my box is bigger than yours will be, and that's because I made a slight error in what I was telling you, but and I haven't followed the pattern, but your pattern will be correct and your box will be slightly smaller and you'll have more of a edge to hang on to, so don't panic too much. Okay, right, once we're happy that we've got those two lines, one along the top and one along the bottom, and we can take the backing off and we can add our zip through that hole there. Double check that my zip works as it should. Yeah, great. Okay, now I like my zip pull to be on my left, so that is how I'm going to insert it into here. And I'm just lining it up. Now I am going to double check that this is nice and straight on the right side as well, so don't panic too much. Okay, so we're just going to flip that over. Now I like my metal stopper to be showing at the end of my zip here, just so that when I come to sew it in, I know exactly where it is. So if you don't like that, just make sure that yours is not showing through. you can trim that off. I'm quite happy with that positioning. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stitch it into place. So I'm going to start at this bottom cornery bit here, because your eye is drawn to the zip pull. So I'm going to start here and I'm going to sew all the way around the outside, and I'm going to use a really scant 1/8 of an inch. So that's about a 2.5 millimeter away. I'm going to use my regular stitch length. You can use your top stitching length if you prefer. I'm going to stick with my regular stitch length because I'm using a contrast colour, and I just want to make sure I'm not too wonky or wobbly. So I'm going to start with my needle down, because that means that when I get to the corner, as I did before, I can decrease my stitch length down to get right into the corners, and also I can stop with my needle down, lift my presser foot and pivot around the corners. Right, great stuff. Okay, that's nice and neat. There, just trim any loose ends off. Okay. Right, let me double check that I haven't missed any steps. I do like to miss a few steps when I'm being filmed. Okay. Now, before we go anywhere, let's open that zip to at least halfway. We will check it again later, but just in case, we know that zip is open halfway. Okay. Now on the wrong side, we are going to, oh, let me just trim my zip tails from there. How have I managed to sew through the metal bit? Look, I've sewn, well, maybe the stitch goes over the metal bit, but my positioning is not great and I haven't broken a needle. That's pretty impressive. I think I've sewn over that metal stopper rather than through it, but it looks like I've sewn through it from there. Right, we are going to fold this over and match the bottom edges. Okay, there will be a little bit of an overfold here, and that's just so that your zip pocket has got a bit of body to it, a bit of capacity, so that when you put things into it, you are not pulling your lining out of shape. Okay, so I'm just pinning through the pocket layers, not pinning through the lining. And then what we're going to do, we're going to sew from the tops here. I'm going to back stitch at the start. I'm going to sew down to about here, back stitch at the end. Change my stitch length to a basting stitch, sew across my turning gap at the bottom there, and then repeat on this side what I've done here. So it'll be regular stitch length and back stitch at the start and the end here, basting stitch across here, and then we're going to turn the whole bag through this turning gap really in the end. So let me just mark where that is. I want to make this as wide as I can without going too near the corners. In fact, I think I can go a bit wider than that, because you've got to fit the whole bag through this at the end. Okay, so I think I'm going to stitch on the right side. So I'm going to pull my lining back. We're only sewing through the pocket layers here. Okay, I've increased my stitch length. So I've backstitched at the start, I've backstitched just then, increased my stitch length. And I've come to my other straight pin. So I'm decreasing my stitch length back down to my regular stitch length. I'm going to backstitch a bit. And then I'm going to keep sewing as normal until I get back up to the other side of the pocket. Okay, right, double check that looks good. Yep, that looks good. To take my pins out. Now we can leave that basting stitching in until we come to turn the bag through, but just so that I don't forget, I'm going to steam press those stitches. Now when we come to take these stitches out then to turn the bag through, it will leave you a nice little line of stitch holes that you can fold along to make sure that you're turning these seam allowances under accurately. What I also like to do is just fold them back and give them a little press. Try not to scald your fingers here. Easier said than done sometimes, I think. I'm just folding these back. And then when we come to sew up the turning gap later, it'll already be positioned, it'll already be trained, ready to fall into place perfectly. Right, now I'm going to open my zip all the way to the end and just leave it, don't touch it, leave your zip as it is. Okay, so next we're going to make our slip pocket. I've cut mine out of my exterior fabric just to make a really nice contrast in my lining. I've also got my my branding label here, which I always forget to add, so I've pinned it to my slip pocket to try and remember not to lose it or not to forget to put it in. In fact, I'm going to swap that over to my lining panel in the hope that I don't forget to add it. Right, so this one you cut the other way round, so you cut this one 10 inches wide by 9 inches high. So we're going to fold that in half, right sides together. Now I've not managed to cut this very well, have I? From a centering point of view, I don't suppose it matters that we've lost the... No, that's fine actually, because we've got two sets of peacocks there. Okay, ignore me. It's been cut very, very well. Okay, so I'm going to fold this in half right sides together. I'll add a little clip. Right, I'm just going to add a few clips to this just to hold it in place. And we're going to sew around all three sides, leaving a turning gap in the bottom edge. So exactly the same as we did for our zip pocket. Going to start sewing. Let me add some clips in for my turning gap. There we go. So we're going to start sewing in either one top corner is fine, and I'm going to back stitch at the start there. I'm going to use my regular stitch length and regular seam allowance. So I'm going to start stitching there, sew down to here, back stitch again, increase my stitch length up to my longest basting stitch and sew between these two marks here, decrease my stitch length, back down again and back stitch, and then sew to the end back stitch. So I'm going to have back stitch in here at either end, and I'm going to have back stitch in here either side of the turning gap, and then across this turning gap just going to have basting stitches, and then we'll steam press those, take them out, turn it right way round and fold them under, and it'll be perfectly neat, hopefully. Okay, so I've just back stitched, increased my stitch length to my longest stitch length. And I'm going to change back down again now. bit of back stitching to start us off. One more stitch, and then back to the end. And I've back stitched there as well. Right, now just take these corners off and these top folded bits, just taking a bit of bulk out of the seam allowance there. And then what we're going to do on these bottom corners, we're going to cut straight across. Don't cut too near your stitches. And then we're also going to go further into the seam allowance and take a little bit extra off as well. Okay, all that extra bulk out of those seam allowances there of this pocket. I'm going to steam press these stitches in the bottom here. Okay, and then we'll just unpick these stitches, take these stitches out, so you'll be left with the line of stitch holes. So by steaming it and then unpicking them, you're left with that line of stitches, which then you can fold along and turn under. Doing this very neatly, as you can see. Just not. Right, let's take this extra thread out. Put my cap on my seam ripper because, as we know, safety never takes a day off. And turn this right sides out then. Now, as I push the corners out, I'm just going to fold over that seam allowance so that as I push it out, it comes out as neat and square as it can. Only because I've lost my trusty crochet hook and I'm having to use all sorts of random things like ends of screwdrivers and ends of scissors and things that you shouldn't really be using for turning things out. I think I might need to find another crochet hook. So I'm just going to very, very gently push out these corners. Want them to be nice and neat and turned out, but you don't want to cut through those stitches. Okay, so work out which is your right side. So my fabric is directional, so I want my right side to be this side where I've got the peacocks facing the right way, and fold along that line of stitch holes that we've just taken the stitches out of, and the same on the other side. Okay, make sure those are nicely lined up. You haven't got any little bubbles in that end of the seam allowance, and then we'll give it a little press. I like to press my bottom edge first just to make sure that the seam allowances are nice and neat. Okay, and then I'll do this end. And then I'll do this other end. Once I'm happy with those three sides, and I know they're all nice and even, then I'll do the top edge as well. Actually, that looks quite nice with those peacocks a bit lower down. That's good. Right, so now we're going to top stitch this pocket. And I'm going to top stitch on the right side. I'm going to use my top stitching length, which is slightly longer. And I'm top stitching at 1/8 of an inch away, or 3 mil if you're working in metric. Okay, right, that is a lovely pocket, very good. Okay, so we need our lining panel. Aha, my label. Now we are going to place this slip pocket over the other side. So that's one side, that's the back of our bag or the front of our bag, and this will be the opposite side. So we've got our marks that we made earlier, and they are what we're going to use to line this up. So fold your pocket in half just to find the centre. We're going to place this 1.5 inches from the bottom edge and centred over those marks. Hang on, this label keeps getting in my way. I'll be glad though that I haven't forgotten it. Right, okay. So place that centred over the mark. Now that's measuring around about around about 2 1/8 inches away from the side for me, but as long as you've got yours centered over those 2 marks, then that's great. And I'm just going to double check actually that it's even all the way, so it should be 1.5 inches all the way along. Yep, great. Right, let's add some pins to keep that in place, and then we're going to stitch it on. I'm just going to add 4 pins for the minute, just hold it in place. I'm going to add my label. I am going to add my label. All I'm going to do is just fold my label in half and slot it into the side of the pocket. Doesn't really matter which side I put it in, but I'll pop it in this side. And let's add a pin to hold it in place. Okay, now that's ready to sew on, but I think I would like to divide my pocket in half. So let's see how wide it is. It's just about 9 inches wide. Not sure how I've managed that. I think my seam allowances must have been slightly off there, but that's okay. So you can decide where you want to divide it. I'm going to draw a line then. Actually, I'm going to draw a line. So because this peacock here is not quite centered, I'm going to base my line on that, on centering it over those peacocks, and then it will look nice and intentional. So I'm just going to draw a line. Oh, hang on, that wasn't even centered there. Let's try that again. There we go. So I've drawn a line right up the centre of those peacocks. Okay, now I'll tell you what I'm going to do before I do it, and then I'll do it. Okay, so I'll turn it around to show you. I'm going to start sewing at one of these ends, probably this end, and I'll backstitch. I'll backstitch a few times because this is a stress point on a pocket. And I'm going to sew down to the bottom here, to this corner, and I'm going to stop with my needle down, lift my presser foot and pivot. And then I'm going to sew to where this line is here. And then I'm going to sew up this line, backstitch a few times. I'm going to turn around and sew back down that line, lift my presser foot and pivot, sew to this corner, and then back up to the top here, and back stitch here at the top. Okay, so I'll have back stitching at the top of all of these stress points and 1 line of stitching along, but I'll have 2 lines of stitching down the centre here, centre-ish, just to add a bit of extra strength. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use my regular stitch length, and I'm going to sew using my 1/8 of an inch top stitching seam allowance. That is 3mm. Right, so that is lovely and attached. All good. We can take these pins out, and I didn't forget my label. Just got a few extra stray threads to clip. And then this pocket is all good. Right. I don't know if you just heard that car roaring past. Apologise if you do. I've got single glazing in the studio here, and hear everything that's going on out on the street. Right, okay, so we can put this interior, this line into one side for the minute. That chalk will come out as I rub it. So we've got our pockets, both our pockets. Our zip is still open. Pop it to one side. We're going to do the zip bridge next. Right, let's get started on the zip bridge. So what you will need is your 4 zip bridge pieces, 2 exterior, 2 lining, and your longer zip. Just check if I've missed anything. Yeah, I have missed something. You'll also need a needle and thread. Mine is very bent because I never use it. Or I wasn't using it. Right, so on the zip bridges, I've marked 1/4 inch away from each short end, and I've done that on the right side for the exterior and the wrong side for the lining. Okay, so you can pop those to one side for the minute and grab hold of your zip. Now, before we go any further, the first thing I'm going to do is add some stitches at the end here, just to stop me accidentally pulling that zip pull off. I'm just going backwards and forwards over the end of the zip there, just to make sure that it doesn't come off. Also going to add a bit of fray check to the ends, to these raw ends of the zip, just so that it doesn't fray when we're working with it a bit later. Okay, so that end is fine. You could add a dab of glue instead of stitching over it. Doesn't matter, either way is fine. Just try and dry that a bit before it gets fray check everywhere. Okay, so what we're going to do with this open end then is we're going to fold these seam allowance, or these zip tapes, sorry, at a 45-degree angle, so that the fold of the zip tape comes up to meet the zip teeth. Okay, let me hold it that way, you might be able to see it a bit better. Okay, so I've done mine so that, hang on, I'm trying to do it back to front for me. There we go. I've literally just folded it so that the zip teeth go off at a 90-degree angle. Just folded that zip tape at a 45-degree angle. And you can see the zip tape on the back there, folded over. So once you're happy that you've got a nice neat fold, and I'm usually happy when I can see that the fold of my zip tape is running right along the bottom of those teeth. And then I'm just going to add a few hand stitches just to keep it in place. Now you can machine stitch this, but this is one of the few things that I do hand stitch so that it doesn't shift about while you're stitching it into place, because I think a nice neat end to a zip is very important for a professional finish on your bag. These stitches don't have to be particularly neat because they're not going to be seen, they'll be in your seam allowances, which is a good job because mine are not particularly neat. Okay, so we've got one side folded over and held into place. So I'm going to do exactly the same on this second side. I'm just going to fold this and make sure it lines up. Yep. So I've just folded that exactly the same as I did for the first one. The fold of the zip tape is directly underneath the zip teeth, and a few stitches to hold it in place. Just double check that those match. Yes, they do. Great. You want a nice neat end to this zip, I think. There we go. Right, that zip is prepared. I'm just going to pop my needle back in my pin cushion before I leave it somewhere. All right, so what we need now is our zip bridges back again. Just need two, so one exterior and one lining. And we're going to place exterior right sides up. And then I'm just trying to think about the direction of my, yeah, that's good. Okay, thinking about the direction of my peacocks. Don't know it really matters because it's only a very small piece of fabric, isn't it? Right, now we are going to run some basting tape along one edge between those two marks that we made. So those marks at 1/4 inch that we've already made, okay? And we'll take that backing paper off, and then we're going to place this zip right sides down. You can unzip it if you like, it doesn't matter. And we're going to place the zip teeth, so those teeth that are at an angle, just shy of that mark that we've made at 1/4 inch. Okay. We push it a bit further towards you so you can see it. So I've got my mark here and the teeth are just this side of that mark. And then we'll press it down all along. Okay, we're going to add another line of tape, again between those two marks. Just have a look at the exterior to see where that is. Although it doesn't really matter if you go all the way along on this open end. Okay, take the backing paper off of there, and then we'll add our lining right sides down, matching up these marks. And if you've marked your centres, you can also line up your centres. Now, how we're going to sew this is we're going to start here at this mark by the open end, and we're going to start sewing. We're going to back stitch, and we're going to sew all the way to this second line, and then we're going to stop with our needle down and pivot and sew along the line to the end there. Now we are going to use, what kind of seam allowance are we using? Let me double check. Just the regular 3/8 inch seam allowance on this one, and our regular stitch length. Okay, so I'm going to start with my needle down so that I know if I need to lift my presser foot and pivot. Actually, this might be a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just double check your pattern for this one, okay? What did I say? I'm going to start with my needle down in case I need to reposition. I'm doing a few back stitches. Okay, and then stop at that line, lift your presser foot and pivot, and sew along the line. Okay, now before we do anything, I'm just going to double check how that looks, because my stitching did go a little bit wonky there. So I think it must be a 1/4 inch seam allowance on that one. In fact, I'm going to make a note, so by the time you get this pattern, hopefully should have the seam allowance on it. Okay, right, so that's lovely. We just need to clip these corners. So we're just going to clip this top corner here, and I'm just going to take a little bit more out of the seam allowance of the cotton side. I'm not really going to take much more out of the seam allowance here because you've got the zip there and you don't want to risk that fraying. If you, if you are using zip tape that you know frays, maybe just add a little dab of fray check there as well. And then I'm just going to add, clip a tiny corner out of that corner there, just to help with having it sit straight afterwards. Okay, so we can turn this right sides out then. And you can use the zip tape to pull it out nice and straight. That helps pull the corners out. That's lovely. Maybe let's add a couple of clips or pins. Add a couple of pins in here just to keep these raw edges together. I'll do that all the way along. So we've got a nice closed end there. We've sewn that together, but this end is open. So all we need to do is fold these back along those 1/4 inch lines and fold them over. Okay, so that's one side. Just need to do the other side to match. So you're doing the exterior and the lining, folding them over and pulling them nice and straight so that they match each other and you get a nice neat finish. So it looks nice and neat on that side. What does it look like on the back? Yep, it looks pretty good to me. Just going to add a little pin in here to hold that together. Now I would recommend having a little steam press of this if you're able to. If you're not able to, then that's okay. Just clip it as best you can. And when you're sewing it, just try and make sure that it's nice and neat as you're doing your top stitching. Now I've got glass head pins, so it doesn't matter if I press on them. They're not going to melt. I'm going to take my pin out of that corner though, because I really need to get in here and make sure that's nice and neat, because that's the corners we've folded over. That looks great. Okay. Actually, let me add a clip instead, which will be a little bit easier. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to top stitch along these 3 finished edges. Don't worry about this long raw edge for the minute, but we're going to top stitch down this open end along the zip and up the finished end, if you like. We can back stitch at the start and the end, and you can baste along these open edges then as well, just to hold them together if you want to. I think I will, just to make sure that they don't shift around. I'm going to use a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, that's 3mm, and I'm going to use my regular stitch length. Right, I'm going to change down because I'm not going to get quite into the right place with that stitch length. So I've changed my stitch length down so that I can get into the corner, lift my presser foot and pivot. And then the same along this last side. Now I'm at the end, so I'm just going to back stitch one so I'm still on the fabric, and then I'm going to turn it so that I'm facing the raw edges, and I'm going to increase my stitch length to a basting stitch, and I'm just going to baste along these open edges to hold them together. Right, so that's one side of our zip bridge done. That looks great, I think. Now we want our second pieces. Now, which way should these be if they are matching each other? Probably that way, but I don't know if it really matters. That's okay. Right, so all we are going to do now is exactly the same as we did before, but we're going to try and ignore the fact that we've already done it once before. So add a bit of basting tape between those two marks again, as we did. Not doing anything different at all, just doing it on the other side. And then we're going to add our zip. So this time the open end is on my right, but again I'm making sure that the teeth are just shy of that line that we made at 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so the zip is right sides down on top of my zip bridge. Great. Okay, actually I'll leave it like this because it's a little bit easier to manage like that. Another piece of basting tape, and you can go all the way from the end on the open end of the zip. I'm just going as far as the marks on the long end of the zip, the closed end. Okay, and then we're going to add the lining piece to this as well. So lining piece right sides down, and we're matching those 1/4 inch lines and ends and raw edges everywhere that you can match. Do match. Okay. Now, because we are doing it on the other side this time, we're again going to start at the open end, but we're going to start here. So we'll start sewing at the top of this 1/4 inch line, sew down as far as 1/4 of an inch. If you need to mark it, actually, feel free to mark it where you need to pivot. That will make it much easier to make sure that you're being accurate on this one. So feel free to just mark where you need to pivot there. Leave your needle down, lift your presser foot, pivot, and sew to this end, and we're going to stop at that line there. Okay, so back stitch at the start and the end, using our regular stitch length. Remember to turn that back down again if you did some basting, and needle down. Okay, right, so again, I'm going to clip off the corner here, clip a little bit of the teeth there, and I'm going to take a little nip out of these corners on the back here, which I find just helps them fold in a little bit easier. Okay, so we'll turn this right sides out. And again, we can use the zip to help us pull this out nice and neat. Okay, just gently, no need to be too rough with it, or too enthusiastic, as I say to my husband when he does something with a bit too much enthusiasm, something handmade. Careful, I've made that. Right, so I'm just matching up my raw edges again, as I did before. That's nice and neat. And then we just, oh, that pin's too close there. And we just fold over these seam allowances, or these marks that we've got here on the front and the back. Make sure they line up as best they can. Not too successfully there. Use a pin to encourage that little bit of seam allowance down inside. Yep, that's better. Okay. So these are a little bit fiddly, but I find that if you do fiddle with it, you do get a nice, neat finish. Okay. Lovely. Right. So let's just give that a little press just to make sure I get a nice neat finish. So I'm just ignoring this first side of the zip really that we've already done, just pretending it's not there. Get a nice neat finish. Right, then we're gonna sew around the 3 edges as we did before, and then you can baste along the top raw edges if you'd like to as well. So regular stitch length. And take my pins out before I get to them. Right, let's baste along this edge as well now. Okay, right, there is our lovely neat zip bridge. You can do it up and double check that it all matches up. If it doesn't, you can unpick it, or you can just decide to accept it, quirks and all. Right, actually I'm really quite pleased with that. That looks great. Right, so now we need our lining. So grab your lining that you had before. And we're going to open this zip bridge up completely. Now there is a picture in the pattern, but you are basically going to treat it as though it's just one panel, which is quite nice. We do need to mark the centres of these zip bridges though, so let's do that, just so we can line everything up nice and neat, get a nice neat finish. And let's mark the centre of this one. We're going to match these up to the centres that we marked, or rather the marks that we used to centre our pockets. So if you match up that centre there, and then just smooth this out, so you've got your zip bridge matching the raw edges along this top here, and then this one as well. So just make sure that your zip is not twisted. Okay, obviously you can't zip up your zip like this, but what it's doing on one side, it's matching on the other side. Okay, and then when you come to sew your side seam of this lining, you'll be able to do your zip up. Okay, now all I'm going to do is just baste these into place. You can take your centre pins out if you like. So I'm going to use my longest stitch length. I'm going to sew at 1/4 inch or 6mm. All I'm doing is literally just basting to hold these in place while we carry on with construction. Okay, and I've back stitched at both ends of that, and then I'll do the second one. Right, now let me get rid of some of these loose threads before I go any further, because I find if you don't take them out when you spot them, you'll spot them when it's too late to keep them out of the seam allowance. Okay. Right, that looks great. Okay, so you can see that when you sew this side seam, your zip will match up perfectly. Okay, if it doesn't at this point, then unpick these zip bridges and just alter that. But if your zip did the same thing on both sides, then you should be okay with that. The last thing we need to do on this panel for the minute is get hold of your lining top. No, that might not be what it's called. Hang on, let me tell you what it's called. This is your interior top, sorry, E. Okay, and we're going to sew this into the top of this panel so that it ends up like that. Okay, so if you've got directional fabric like me, make sure that the bottom of your peacocks is facing the top there, so they're going to get sewn together the right way round. Let's mark the center just so we can make sure that we're lining up everything properly and everything all nice and even. I'm going to mark the top and the bottom of my panel because that's going to help when we come to do the final construction then. Okay, so that's the bottom of my peacocks. So let's match that to start with in the center there. And then all you're going to do is just smooth this out along the top. It should in theory be the same length if your cutting was fairly accurate. If it's not, don't worry too much, even it out, and then we can always trim the extras off afterwards. Don't panic too much at this stage. Okay, one last check because I have got directional fabric. Yeah. Right, we are going to sew this with our regular seam allowance. Yeah. Just wanted to double check I hadn't missed anything. So a regular seam allowance, regular stitch length. I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. Now I've just back stitched where I've gone over the end of the zip bridge, and I'm going to do that on all ends of zip bridges just to give it a bit of extra strength. Double check that I haven't sewn my peacocks upside down. No, phew. Although they are upside down on my zip bridge, so that's worked out very well. Right, so fold this back with your seam allowances facing up towards the interior top. Okay, so have it flat and then fold these seam allowances up. You can give that a press, or you could just take the lazy route like me and just smooth it back and finger press it. And then we're going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the seam here on the interior top through all of those layers. So I'm just going to finger press it as I go. So regular top stitching length if you like to go a little bit bigger on your top stitching. And if you've gone the lazy option, as you're sewing, just smooth these out, just pull them out so they're fully turned out. There we go. Well, that looks lovely, nice and neat there. Okay. Right, what we need to do now is add a metal zip end. I had them here somewhere safe, my metal zip ends. Hang on, have I put them somewhere too safe maybe? Oh, they were under my instructions, of course. Right, so we are going to need a dab of glue. I'm going to pull this out so that my zip is away from my lining. Now double check how easy it is for you to roll your zip tape before you get started. If you've gone quite far over on your stitches, it might not be that easy, but that's okay for me actually. Just trim that extra thread that I've got there. Right, and you also need some screwdrivers, or a screwdriver rather, because these come with tiny little screws. I've got a magnetic screwdriver set, which works pretty well for these little screws. It comes with a little magnet, and I can re-magnetize it every time I use it. It's great. Right. Right, so you'll need one zip end and one little tiny screw. Let's get these out. These screws are so tiny, aren't they? You're in danger of losing them if you drop one. Right, okay. I tend to leave them in the bag until I'm ready to add my zip end. Okay, right, so what I'm going to do, you can always test fit yours first if this is your first time using these or you haven't used them before. I'm going to add a dab of glue inside my zip end like that. That was a good dab of glue, that was, as well. You've got a few minutes to work with it, so don't panic too much. And then I'm going to fold one end or one side of the zip tape over like that, and then the other side I'm going to fold in half and fold that back over again so that the whole zip is only the width of the teeth. And then I'm going to try and wiggle this on, that zip end on, with all of those layers inside. Push that in as far as I can, just so I know that's nice and secure. So before you add the screw, just double check that your zip tape is nice and even on both sides. And then we'll add our screw into the back there. Try not to lose this little tiny screw. And these are self-piercing, so you should, in theory, be able to get these to screw through your zip tape all the way in. Okay, see if I've got a screwdriver that's slightly bigger but not hugely bigger. I wonder if they say on them what they are. 1.5 by 2.5. Oh, this one probably. There we go, that's what I needed. Right, so once you are happy with that, you can add a dab of glue to it if you want. I don't tend to, I tend to just leave it like it is. So I've added the glue inside, so I'm fairly certain that is not coming undone. Okay, that looks great. How nice will that look inside your bag then? And it's nicely finished and you're ready to use it. Right, let's finish this lining and then we'll add it to the base and then we can finish putting the bag together. So all we're going to do is fold this in half, the same as we did for the exterior. The difference is that the seam is going to end up on the side this time rather than in the back. But favour matching these seams where the interior top meet the lining over the raw edges, okay, because you can always trim the raw edges if it doesn't quite match. That's okay, it doesn't matter. But these interior tops, you really do want them to match. Now when we sew this seam, what we're going to do is we're going to start sewing using our regular 3/8 of an inch seam allowance and back stitch at the top there. And we're also going to finish off using our 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, or 1 centimetre or 1 centimetre. But we're only going to sew about an inch either side using that seam allowance. The bit in the middle we want to taper to a 1/2 inch seam allowance or 1.2 centimetre seam allowance. Now if you're not comfortable doing that, then I would recommend you draw that seam allowance on the back here. Now I don't usually, but I'm going to this time just so I can demonstrate that to you for those of you who are not comfortable doing this. So we've got our 3/8 of an inch mark there, haven't we? Left over from when we measured things. So that will take us to around about where the interior top ends. So now we want to mark a 1/2 inch seam allowance on this middle bit, and that's fine. So all you want to do then is just taper that between the two, from this smaller seam allowance to this larger seam allowance. And then when you're sewing, you can follow this line, this nice tapery line. So we want about an inch or 2.5 centimetres for those of you who are metric. And we can just taper there. Okay. Right, so we're going to back stitch at the start and the end. We're just going to sew this whole seam. We don't need to leave any gaps or do anything funny apart from increasing the seam allowance. We're going to use our regular stitch length. And did I say we're going to back stitch at the start and the end? I probably did, but just in case I didn't, we are. There we go. Great. Now if you're able to press these seam allowances open, that is going to give you such a lovely, nice, neat finish inside your bag. I'm going to try and do mine on the flat. See if I can. Just folding one seam allowance back and pressing a bit of steam just to help it on its way. Leave that to cool down a second, and then I'll fold the other side back just so we know we're getting a really nice, neat, open seam here. That's going to sit so lovely inside your bag then. Especially at the tops, if you are able to open your seam allowances at the tops and bottoms, makes it so much easier attaching your two layers together, your interior and your exterior. Right, that's your lining done. All we need to do now is add the base. So when we come back, we'll add the base and then we'll start on putting these two pieces together, the interior or the lining and the exterior. Right, we're on the home straight now. We've only got a few things left to do. In fact, our pile of pieces is decreasing massively. So last thing we need is our lining base, and you should still have your 4/4 marks on there, 2 on the long sides and 2 on the short sides. And what we're going to do, we're going to match up one of these marks on the long sides to this center mark here underneath the zip pocket, and I think I'm going to use pins for this. I'm just going to pin there, and then I'm going to flip it over, and this 1/4 mark here on the other side of the long bit of the base, and I'm going to match that up to this center mark here underneath my slip pocket and add a pin in there. And then I'm going to match my side seam onto the quarter mark on the short end. We flip it around a little bit easier to pin then. And then we should just have one mark left, one quarter mark and one mark on our base left, so we can pin these together. Okay, so that's joined in 4 places now, so we know that that's nice and even and our bag is not going to sit skew-if. All we need to do now is go around and pin this lining main panel onto the base. Now you might need to add a few clips into here, into the seam allowance, or you might be able to just ease it around this curve. Just wait and see how you get on. If you find that you're getting to a quarter and it's not quite sitting right, then just add a few clips. I'm saying clips, I mean snips. Add a few snips into the seam allowance on the lining main panel. Okay, so all I'm doing is just pinning all the way around here. And this should sit just as nicely as the exterior in theory. Wonky cutting out a side. Speaking to myself there. Or wonky seam allowances. Not always very good at following seam allowances. Okay, so I'm just working my way all the way around this oval base. Just easing this into place. Okay, right, lovely. So we're going to sew around the base the same as we did for the exterior. Change my stitch length back down to my regular stitch length. We are going to use our regular seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre, and we're going to go around it all the way, and then we're going to go around it again 1/8 of an inch or 3 mil inside that, so that in total we end up with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. But if you do a 1/2 inch now, you might find you get lots of puckers. So I find it easier to do in 2 bits or 2 stages, and do the 3/8 of an inch and then go in and take that extra 1/8 of an inch out as well. Right, I'm just pulling my base flat underneath there. Okay, so wherever you start, doesn't matter. I like to start on one of the straighter ends. I'm going to start my needle down, sewing at the regular 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre seam allowance to start with. Okay, I've gone all the way around there. I'm just going to take my pins out. Now I came off my seam allowance part way along because my pins got caught under the corner of my machine there. So I'm just going to take my pins out and I'm going to go back and catch that with the right seam allowance. Terrible, terrible, terrible. Just going to go back and catch it so that it is the right seam allowance to start with. There it is. I just don't want to start doing my extra bit with the base in the wrong place. There we go. Okay, Right, now we're going to take that extra 1/8 of an inch. So I'm just using my existing stitching line just to line up against, and I'm sewing an 1/8 of an inch inside the seam allowance so that my seam allowance will become a 1/2 inch altogether. Right, excellent. Okay, so now we can get our pinking shears and take away these seam allowances. Remember, if you haven't got pinking shears, you can just notch into the seam allowance. Or I should have checked, hang on, let me double check that I haven't got any puckers before I start trimming these seam allowances away. Didn't think of that. No, it looks pretty good. Phew, that was lucky. Okay, now you can clip into your first line of stitching if you want to, because you don't really need that. Doesn't really matter. As long as you take away the bulk of this fabric, just to help it sit nice and flat around this oval base. There we go. Right, lovely. Okay. Well, that's our lining done. We just need to pop it together with our exterior and then we're done. Right, so retrieve your exterior, and it turns out we should have turned it right sides out earlier, so go ahead and turn it right sides out now. Okay. Now we're going to pop our exterior inside our lining. So by turning it out right sides out now means that we don't have to turn it right sides out again. We can just pull it through the turning gap. Now decide which side you'd like to be on the front and which you'd like to be on the back. Now when I wear my bags, I like them to open from left to right when I'm looking at them. So I'm going to put the back seam of mine in line with my zip pocket. So I'm going to pop this inside and just shove it down as far in as you can and push those rings down on the strap anchors. Now to make sure this is all nice and even, you're going to be using those marks that we made earlier. Do you remember those quarter marks? So maybe let's match the centres first. So your back seam, your centre back seam, you're going to line up with the centre of your interior top. And then the centre front of your exterior, going to line up with the center of your interior top on that side. Okay, so that's the two most important ones, I think. And then we just need to, now I've taken out my center pin marks, of course, because that would be too easy otherwise. So I'm just centering this side seam of the lining over the strap anchor that I can see is inside there. And I'm going to do the same on this other mark that I've got, centering that over that strap anchor. Okay, so all 4 quarters are clipped together. Now all you need to do is just go around this top and clip these together in a nice even way. Make sure they're nicely sort of smoothed out and matched up as best as you can. There we go. Okay, now we're going to sew around the entire top of this bag. Now I'm going to use my regular stitch length and my regular seam allowance. It doesn't really matter where you start, I don't think. I might start here just by my back seam. And I'm going to start with my needle down again, so that if I do have to reposition my hands, my bag is not going to go anywhere. Right, lovely. All the way around the top there we were. Just double check that you haven't lost anything in the seam allowances. It all looks pretty even. Great. Now it's time to take out these basting stitches in the bottom of our zip pocket. Okay, remember we steam pressed them earlier, so don't worry too much about steam pressing them. If you well, you can do it now if you forgot. Otherwise, you can just unpick those. Okay, I can see a really nice straight line of stitch holes. Are really obvious to me, so that's good. I think it does help leaving them in right until the end. Okay, pull all this extra thread out. Take these extra threads off. Okay, this is the most exciting bit. Okay, so fortunately we remembered to leave our zip pocket open, and we're just going to gently, gently, tug our exterior bag out through this zip pocket in this gap. We go. So I've got the bulk of it out. Okay, oh look, I've got a loose thread there right in the seam. Pull that out. Okay, just ease this out nice and gently. If you want to make this out of vinyl or using foam as your stabilizer or whatever, you should still be able to turn it out through that gap in the zip pocket, no problem. Right, so we can tuck the lining inside, tuck that zip pocket in, make sure it's all nicely pushed out. My bottom seam here is not so nicely pushed out. That might take a little while to sit out properly. my faux leather seems to be a little bit bouncy, so it does seem to want to roll in a little bit. But hopefully, if I leave my bag stuffed overnight, stuffed full with some paper or some bubble wrap or something, then that should hopefully train that into place. Right, so the last thing we need to do on this, well, nearly last thing, is just top stitch around the top edge. You can give this a good steam press, or you can just finger roll it if you are of the cutting corners persuasion, like me. All I'm doing is finger rolling this top seam out and adding some clips along the top there. So by having these seams offset, so we've got the exterior seam at the back there and the lining seam on the side, not only does it reduce the bulk of those seam allowances, but also I think makes it slightly sturdier and more stand-uppy, despite the fact that we've only actually got fleece in there. So you can squash this bag flat if you're going on holiday, or you need to take it with you, or you know, you want to be able to have the option to change your bag and you haven't got a lot of space to carry extra bags with you. You can squash it flat, but actually that stands up quite nicely as it is. Now, so we want to top stitch around the outside, because I've got a flatbed machine. If I want to top stitch on the exterior fabric, then I need to turn my bag inside out. So if you have a free arm, then you don't need to turn it inside out. But if you have a flatbed like me, then you will need to turn it inside out. And just be aware of where your strap anchors are, so you're not pulling too much on them and causing them too much stress. Right, I'm just going to press my base flat using my hand so that it doesn't get too many creases in while it's turned the wrong way around. Right, I think I'm going to start sewing around about probably the side. Why not the side? Doesn't really matter with this bag. It's all higgledy-piggledy with the seams in different directions, isn't it? So I'll start sewing on the side, folding back my strap anchors to keep them out of the way, and I'm going to sew using my 1/8 of an inch or 3mm seam allowance away around the top, and I'm going to use a top stitching stitch length. I'm going to start with my needle down. I'm just going to sew around the entire top. Right, so we'll just trim these loose threads away from where I started stitching. Take them away on the inside as well. And then we can turn this right side out. Do still need to close my turning gap in my zip pocket, of course. I always seem to leave it till last, just in case I need to go in and do any last minute adjustments or changes, or take anything out from seam allowances, or pull linings down while I'm doing top stitching, things like that. Okay, so my oval base. As you can see, it's sitting a little bit nicer now, but I think it does still need a really good stuff, this one. So I'll stuff it and leave it overnight, I think, just to get a really nice neat finish on that one. Now, nearly done. All we need to do is pull the zip pocket out and close this turning gap. Now, because we folded our seam allowances under earlier, they should hopefully be really nice and easy to match up. Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay. Just match these all the way along, and you can either close these with a ladder stitch by hand, or you can do a close machine stitch, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go for a scant 1/8 of an inch, so that's about 2 mil, and I'm using my regular stitch length, and I'm just going to sew along that turning gap to close it, and I'm back stitch at the start and the end. Okay, lovely. So I'll take these stray threads off of the end. I'm quite excited about this bag. I think it looks great. I'm really pleased with it. I quite like that it's a little bit slouchier, but has still got the stability of a structured handbag. That's great. Right, so I'm just pushing I'm using my hands just to push everything down inside. Look, there's a bit that's a bit more bouncy. It's not quite sitting out straight. I'll just finger roll that seam a little bit. So make sure everything's nice and neat. Push down inside the lining. Once it's all pushed out into the seam allowances, you shouldn't have a baggy lining then. It should all be sitting nice and flat. So that's mine after I've pushed mine into the seam allowances. Looks great. And we can use the zip to close it up. Fantastic. Oh my goodness, I love this bag. Oh, the only thing we need is a strap. Well, here's one I made earlier. Or here's one we made earlier, rather, because you were with me. And all we need to do then is clip that onto these strap anchors, and your bag is ready to use. I think that looks great. Oh, that's the back. That doesn't look so good. Doesn't look bad, does it? Considering it's the back, but there's the front of the bag. And I think that looks great. I think actually I could shorten that and still use it as a handbag. It just won't be a crossbody bag, and that still looks great as a handbag even. Well, I'm really pleased with this bag and I've really enjoyed making it. I'm glad you were able to join me to make it with me. I hope that you make your own, and if you do, please come and show me. I'd love to see what you make. Thanks for sewing with me.